So, Robin Vincent, CEO and CINNO at Canobi Technologies, thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Cool. Great to be here.
I'm not as familiar with the CINNO role, so maybe start there with explaining a little bit of that for folks that may not know.
Well, my background is all technical. This is the first time I'm being a CEO.
Okay.
So naturally, I felt that I was definitely more on the technical side than the CEO side. But over the course of the company, I'm enjoying the CEO role a lot more than I thought I might. But I still like to keep it very clear that I'm still I am the lead technical engineer behind the entire thing.
Yeah. And so talk a little bit about folks who may not know your background. I see you've got a long list of leadership positions previous to Canobi. Without having to go through the entire resume, what are some of the highlights if you think about it and just maybe 10-year chunks of the road that led you to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I originally sort of started out life as an electrical engineer or taking an electrical engineering course. And my father was an engineer, which is part of why I went down that path. So I think that gave me a lot of critical thinking and engineering type sort of skill sets. At the time, I was focused in the computer industry, and at that time, the computers were just unbelievably slow.
Yeah.
So got more into the infrastructure side and worked my way through most computer departments within enterprises, so storage, networking, and so on and so forth. And a new role appeared in the industry just around the 2000s called an infrastructure architect, which was a multidiscipline role. And I sort of jumped on, actually, I didn't jump, my manager suggested the role title to me, which fit what I do very well. But just through natural osmosis, I think you sort of climb the ladder. And I spent the last 15 years in different levels of management. I've always been more, I think, of a shop foreman than a manager. I always like being out on the shop floor, and even though it's computers and there's not a real floor, but yeah, I like being out there working with the guys and keeping a bit of a technical role.
Yeah. So I always like to think about this because of the era that I grew up. So I was born in 1970, but do you remember your very first computer?
Yeah, actually, I do. It was actually a portable computer called the Osborne,
Oh, yeah.
and it weighed a small ton, and it had a
Yeah.
screen on it about that big.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first portable. My first computer was a laptop, essentially,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was pretty cool.
I was thankful enough that my father got into computer repairs and he was working at Exxon of all places. And they were dabbled in computers for a while. I don't know if you remember, they had a computer called Quicks, which was an
Yeah,
electronic typewriter. Also weighed a ton and had a little thin screen. You could type one line at a time, do the
yeah.
autocorrect, and then he would enter and and it was magical at that time. I'm like, wow, you don't need to use whiteout on your typewriter anymore. That was a big improvement.
Yeah, 8-inch floppies, and yeah, I
Yeah.
remember when they came up with the zip drives. Wow, that was just a massive leap forwards.
Yeah.
That's quite special.
Where did you think your love of technology and all things related to computers come from?
Well, my father owned a computer company, actually, a small computer company in England, which is how I ended up getting into electrical engineering because, I wanted to work there. So, but back then you needed an electrical engineering degree to service computers. I mean, that was back when we were using oscilloscopes and troubleshooting chips, and it wasn't the rip and replace that it is today. So I think that kind of got me started for sure. But I think just being around both my parents, they're both quite creative people. My father's an engineer, my mom's just a creative human being. So I just always had this wide-eyed approach to everything and just see the world as vastly unfinished. And yeah, I see solutions. I don't really see problems.
That's a great perspective. Have you always been like a tinkerer when it comes to tech and electronics?
Oh, always. I think my mom told me once that made the mistake of buying me a little home sort of saw and hammer at one point. I don't know how old I was, but decided to quickly dismantle my climbing frame the moment my parents were backs were turned. I've been taking stuff apart since I can remember.
Yeah.
I'm getting better at putting it back together again. So that's the good
Yeah.
point. That's the good side.
It reminds me of when I was younger, we would buy furniture, and I would be the first one to race to my parents
Yeah.
and volunteer and put everything out on the floor and the paper and just organize all the tools and everything, make sure everything that was in the sheet was included, and then get to work like a huge puzzle piece or something to work on.
Yeah.
You mentioned this idea of enjoying your time on what you call the shop floor. Is it important for you to always, in terms of the teams you manage and the companies you're working at, to really have that understanding of the work that's being done and so that you can understand as you manage people who are doing those jobs that you can speak their language and they also feel a connection with you because they know that you've also done the work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of different management styles, and my style definitely is orientated around understanding the content and being able to get in there, roll the sleeves up and get in there with the guys and help them fix problems. It's also where I get a lot of the enjoyment. I enjoy being in the deep end. I enjoy learning. I enjoy solving problems. So management is its own set of problems and skill sets. But I would say I definitely get a lot more enjoyment out of fixing and solving, real world problems. Yeah.
Where do you think your management style comes from? Were there relationships with mentors or previous bosses that were inspirational in your growth?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wouldn't actually be even attempting. I think I've been told in the past, and it's probably true, that I'm a better leader than I am a manager, for one. So I don't think management has ever come naturally to me, but I've been very, very lucky and very fortunate in my career to work with some really good managers. And I think that's the way life is. You sort of, you take in pieces that you recognize you want to be like and integrate them into yourself. And I've been very, very lucky in that case and worked with, I would say the majority have been fantastic. Yeah, even exceptional. I've been very lucky.
That's great.
Yeah.
As you think about the where you were as you were moving into getting Canobi started, can you take us back to that time? It looks it's around 2019. What was I'm a big fan of origin stories, so I'm curious about like how you were thinking about the inception of Canobi and what was going through your mind at the time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try and keep it really short. So essentially, actually, Canobi goes back to 2001. I was always into aquariums, into freshwater, sort of hit the max on that. Then got into saltwater and very quickly found out, it sort of started going up in terms of the more difficult species to keep. And very quickly realized that the mortality rate for stingrays and seahorses, which I had sort of started looking at, was around 70% in the home aquarium industry. And to be honest with you, I just thought that was disgusting and actually didn't even want to be a part of it if that was the norm. But at the same time, I've always enjoyed that area. So I just kept at it and thought, well, this is obviously probably most likely transplant shock. So started building a system to monitor what a fish tank probably should be based on the data that was available in terms of the ocean. Got that there and then started building up a system that would line two fish tanks together and then started sharing the data with some suppliers that I were buying seahorses and stingrays from. And collectively, through sharing data and lining up environments, we were able to drop that mortality rate to about 40%.
Wow.
And that software continued to run my aquariums and still does today. In 2014, I decided I had this novel idea that I was going to build a little permaculture orchard because we have a farm. So I did that, and it was funny. I was still working full time, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. And there was the final sort of movement of QNX and BlackBerry. I was with QNX at the time, and an opportunity came up for me to, step out on my own or move over to BlackBerry. And I decided to step out on my own. And I just thought, well, I think we're there. I think we can probably use all of the experience I have in, managing data centers and environments and apply everything I've learned in my career to the indoor farming volume of air and see what I could do. And of course, at the time, the most of what was going on was it was in medical cannabis. So we ended up, just worked as a sort of pro services consultant for about 4 or 5 years. But every time I ran into a problem at a client site, I typically built a piece of software or something that would detect it in the future and then potentially even resolve it. And in about 2019, it really became obvious that I'd actually built a product and I didn't even have a website. Just was still sort of running around word of mouth, and I decided, okay, I'm going to try and commercialize this. What was also a big inspiration for me was in 2014. One of the reasons why I got into permaculture was I was just getting a little tired of buying garlic from China and beans from Peru, and I think seeing many of the things that we see in our big department stores today. So I got into it for food, really. Spent that time in medical cannabis, learned an incredible amount. But then COVID happened. And so end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we were already doing some work internationally with some of our agri-agents, and COVID happened, and the door just swung wide open on food, and we just raced right through it. So it was sort of the beginning of our commercialization, and also with COVID, it was a big incentive for people to start looking at how they handle food sovereignty, food and food security. And I felt that a lot of that could be handled with what we were up to, and where we've switched from about 95% cannabis customers to now we're about 70% food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's sort of the origin of what is Canobi today. We're still happy to have medical cannabis customers. We've never really dealt much on the rec side. We're really about a crop over crop consistency and some of the things that are very interesting or even requirements of the medical space. But we're involved in projects now all over the world, Africa, Middle East, here. A little less in Canada. Canada, though, this year I've really seen an upturn. I think a lot of people now are really starting to focus on food and where they buy food.
Yeah.
We are really focused, laser focused on mid-sized farms. We do have some larger customers, and of course, we're not going to turn them down, but we are very focused in terms of new business in the mid-sized farm. I think it's got a great deal of social value. It creates the jobs. I think it's got its own challenges, which is great. It's a very challenging area. And I like dealing with those size of businesses. So yeah, that's where we are today.
What were some of the challenges specifically for you as you were getting Kenobi off the ground in terms of building the team? Did you already have an idea what that makeup would look like? Did you know the specific roles you were trying to fill? I'm always curious about those early days.
No, I don't think so. But I've been very lucky in the sense that I had a good group of advisors around me. And to be honest with you, there's been times at the very early stages I didn't. Doing this alone, entrepreneurs, I think, generally face this issue that, you just can't talk to anybody about what you're going through. Very difficult. It's quite a lonely business. So having a good group of people around with a very diverse set of experience has just been fantastic. So that's helped me decide, or to preempt where the weaknesses might be. But we also took the decision very early on to try and do this with revenue and debt, essentially,
Yeah.
rather than going sort of a VC route. So, in some respects, that's also helped us grow organically. We haven't had this massive cash infusion where we just sort of expand as quickly as we can. It's been quite organic growth. So, I think that's also helped us. With each decision, it's been okay, where do we have a gap? What do we need to fill? And do we have any redundancy in these areas?
For the benefit of the listener who may not be familiar with Kenobi, can you talk about present day, what the current offering is and what the split looks like in terms of the markets you're serving?
So yeah, so we're very small still. Our Canobi is primarily a software company. We do provide all of the hardware that our clients would require to run our software. This has just been primarily due to the fact that, the software is only as reliable as the hardware that you run it on. So we do provide all of the hardware a client requires. The company itself, while it's a software company, also deals with agri-agents. We decided early on to sell through an agri-agent network. And, for anybody that's not sure what an agri-agent is, if they've ever seen Clarkson's farm, there's the guy that advises Mr. Clarkson on how to run his farm. That's an agri-agent. So we actually use agri-agents to sell Canobi for the most part.
Okay.
We do some direct sales. So because of that, we were involved in farms that had those agri-agents had their suppliers, so we got to meet a lot of other suppliers. So we are sort of growing in two ways. Canobi itself as a product has three core components. It has monitoring, so you can monitor air quality, nutrient quality of your farm.
Okay.
It has an industrial level PLC automation component. So essentially, what you're monitoring, you can also manage. So
Yeah.
you can manage your fans, your HVAC, and all of the electronics and components within the farm. And then we also have the business tools, which is a full ERP. So the goal is to move forwards on all three fronts so that we essentially can provide to a client all of the technologies within, generally speaking, that they would require to run their farm. It's very modular. The last thing we wanted to be doing was, getting into a situation or a conversation with a farmer that he loves a product, but he has to replace it in order to use ours. So we
Yeah.
kept it very modular. Typically, when we're talking to clients, we identify the gaps, the places that they want to fix, and we're happy to fill that gap. We're not interested in displacing technologies that they are happy with. So because of that, we typically have a very small landing footprint. We're not there to take over the whole farm. We do tend to spread quickly. I think when people are faced with data and they look at it and they see what's going on, their natural propensity is to want to control it and do more with it. So we're certainly there to help with that. And it's one of the reasons why we're very focused on the mid-sized farm, because when you start getting up into the much larger farms, the requirements of our business would have to go up in order to meet their requirements. So with a mid-sized farm, we're able to keep our team efficient, relatively small, and we still are a very small team. We're about 13 or 14 full-time, and about 30, including people around the world that we take on part-time. And we've got, I think it's about 16 or 17 agri-agents worldwide.
Okay. I noticed on the blog that you make reference in the post to some of the work that you're doing in your in-house lab. And so it sounds, following up on your comment about using data, I get the sense that you're doing a lot of testing about seeing what works and what doesn't in-house as well. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Well, I've always believed that we learn an awful lot more from our failures than our successes. So, and whilst in the early days, it was very common to have clients who say, yeah, give me a good deal and you can use my facility for testing. The moment you ruin a crop, that whole positive side of it disappears.
Yeah.
So, quite early on, we decided to build our own facility. So, we have a small 2,500 square foot indoor farm. And we spend most of our time trying to breaking it. We want to look at what happens when it breaks, identify how things break, what breaks first. And, because of that, we also focus on a lot of very challenging crops. And right now, one of those challenging crops is strawberries. So while we're busy trying to break everything and figure out how not to grow strawberries, we're also trying to figure out how to keep them going. So it's kind of a very cool environment. And I'm like that. I have been on my whole career, and everybody that works for the company is like that. We're all fail fast.
Yeah.
And I completely support the trying of new ideas.
How do you make decisions about what to work on? I saw a post about your 27-day bean and your glacier tomato as well. There seems to be no limit to all the things you can do, but I think at some point you have to make a decision about what makes the most sense for your efforts.
Yeah, so I'm very clear about our efforts in the sense that we are all here to improve Canobi's product.
Okay.
But if I was the only person that was driving what we grow, how we grow it, I think I'd probably be limiting the company. So a lot of these, like the 27-day bean, is actually one of our employees that I just told everybody, look, go out and find the weirdest stuff. Constantly find the weirdest stuff. We'll try and grow it. If we don't think it'll fit in a vertical farm, we'll try and grow it in a vertical farm. And we'll just constantly try things and we'll see what works and what doesn't. So there's a side of the business that's, planting all kinds of different things and seeing how they grow. But the real focus is on the environment profiles, what grows with what can grow in the same nutrients. There's no doubt that the vertical farming and indoor farming industry is very new. And I think that there's a lot of data coming out of universities, very useful data. But much of that data, it's not combination data. It doesn't say, well, hey, if you want to grow strawberries, you can't grow something else with them,
Yeah.
or nothing else will grow in that environment. So we regularly grow lettuce with strawberries, strawberries with eggplants to see what works, what doesn't. Do the timing still hold? Do they grow slower or faster? And this is just a part of us having the lab. It would be for naught if we weren't trying to grow things. So, yeah, the employees pretty much have free reign actually as to what we try and accomplish on that side of things. We also feed everybody from the lab. So I met a fantastic group called Ubuntu Wellness in South Africa. They produce a recipe book that is based on rolling back diabetes and hypertension from
Wow.
using very basic natural foods that grow in Africa. So I came back and said, okay, here's the book. Let's figure out how much of this stuff we can grow in our lab. And let's cook lunch for everybody every lunchtime, because part of just growing plants, you don't necessarily decide to harvest them at the time to eat them
Yeah.
because you're there to grow them. I mean, we grew a
Yeah.
2.5 foot diameter lettuce at one point. It wasn't very good, but we grew it.
Yeah.
So that kind of forced us into a pattern of, okay, well, we're growing it, but we want to make sure that when are we harvesting it? Are we harvesting it early or late? And because now we're eating it, well, that's driven a lot of that data. So yeah.
What drove the trip to South Africa and in general the work you're doing in other countries?
I don't know what drove it. Well, I think life drove it.
Yeah.
I would meet people and they would say, "Hey, you got to come here and you speak at this show." And that was a lot of last year, actually. I have been in South Africa. I was there when I was a kid. I was 1976. Don't remember a lot about it, but I remembered it as a very beautiful country. My uncle
Hmm.
lived there for most of his life.
Okay.
So I already kind of had a propensity to want to go back and kept running into these people. And one of the people that I'd run into wanted to grow, it was a grower in South Africa who was looking to grow strawberries in a vertical farming system we had in our lab. And because of the way Canobi's built, we can deal with remote growers. So I said, okay, you grow the strawberries in our lab. I'll come down there. He's an agri-agent of ours now, and I'll meet some of your clients. So I went there, and as it turned out, we are dealing with our lighting partner is now from South Africa, and we have a product called the Micro Farm, and that is actually manufactured part of it in South Africa as well. So going there actually led to a whole ton of benefits.
Has that opened your eyes to the opportunities that might be available in markets where people may not be paying much attention?
Absolutely. And, I often bring up the fact that actually I shouldn't say fact because I don't know how much verification I've done on it, but I heard once that around 100 years ago we had farming in North America hired more people than any other vertical, and today we have more inmates than we have farmers. So that's the part I'm not sure that that's a fact, but I've heard it more than once. And what's interesting is I'm up on the stage talking about this thing, and I realized, what, we're all running around building farms right now, but what we're actually not doing is building farmers. And if you look at, Canada, we still don't have a lot of controlled environment, if any, controlled environment courses in our universities yet. The colleges are coming up fast, and yet we're doing controlled environment agriculture through cannabis for 20 years. So one of the things that I think has really not so much been surprising, maybe, but it's certainly eye-opening, is the access for people to learn new skills and their interest in agriculture. I mean, sure, it's driven a lot by what happened with COVID, but I think also there's a lot of people that want to rebuild the relationship with their food. And through farming as part of that revenue or that avenue. And I also think we're 70% women, I think, in Canobi at the moment. I've also noticed that there's a great deal of interest from women around the world.
Yeah.
We put up our Canobi Academy online, and we've noticed that there are people signing up from South Africa just to go through our public courses. So there's obviously a real desire for maybe people that don't necessarily have access to schools or the money to go through education that are now realizing that online they can. So it's a big part of what we're doing actually is focusing on education. We built the Canobi Academy to train our customers, but actually have realized it could be a really useful tool for anybody to learn how to do in controlled environment agriculture.
It makes a lot of sense. I saw that your team was also at Vertifarm last year. I'll actually be attending this year, so I don't know if you'll be
Okay.
returning, but it'd be nice to connect if we do.
Yep. Yeah, we're the next big one for me is Green Tech, which is next week.
Yes.
And then we're at the summit, the Innovation Summit in New York in 2 weeks.
Oh, and I'll be in there. I'll be there as well.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm probably going to travel a little less than I did last year. Last year was, I love traveling, but I got to admit by the end of last year, I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, we're going to spend some time at home.
How do you feel about the conversations you have there? Because I noticed you get to slow down and shake hands. And for me, it's helpful because I get to meet some of the guests that have been on the show, but I also get to come home with 10 or 15 new guests that are potentials for the show as well. And what's your experience been connecting with folks at these types of conferences?
I think it's great, actually. My gears have shifted. In the past, I was part of other companies that I did shows, and I was like, yeah, geez, I don't know how much value we get out of this. But at a lot of the shows we did last year, I did a lot of speaking. So saw a different side of it, and we got a lot of value from that and a lot of interactions with people. I'm not naturally the type of person that walks up to strangers. So I don't tend to meet as many people as some of our salespeople do. But I think it's incredible to be, I don't know how many opportunities you get in your life to be at the beginning of an industry. And so it's really wild.
Yeah.
It's very cool. There are so many great ideas out there. There's so many great products and people that are working really hard. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's been exciting, really, ride for me because I actually started it in March of 2020, the show. So think about timing. just before COVID hit, and it wasn't intentional, but all the things that happened because of COVID, to your point, and supply chain disruptions, access to
Yeah.
fresh food deserts, all of this became top of mind. And so I'm grateful to have been at the right place and right time and just along for the ride as well, because it's been really exciting to see all the development that's been happening.
Yeah, I know it was very, very difficult for a lot of people, but for us, actually, I think it's been good. And I think, the sort of outcome of this is to decide what we want to learn from it and what we take away from it and what do we want to go back to. And I hope and believe that we've identified some gaps in our food chain in terms of where we get our food from. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to fill those gaps and meet those needs, reduce the field to plate. And, I say this quite a bit, but I'm really excited about the fact that, one part of the problem is, I believe, fully now solved is that technically speaking, every single human being on this planet could have access to food.
Yeah.
We now have the technical ability to grow food anywhere on this planet.
Yeah. It's really
So it's
exciting.
money and political will.
Yeah. And obviously, with new industries, there's a lot of hype, and we've seen a lot of news about companies getting a ton of funding. And to your point earlier about companies that receive VC funding, and we've seen how some of those have turned out, not necessarily for the better. So there's a lot of interesting, I would imagine, attention from the outside, people seeing, again, trying to decide if this is a fad, what do the cycles look like specifically for this? So I want to talk about some of the things that maybe people don't talk about much in vertical farming, and it's something they get highlighted in articles outside the industry. Let's talk a little bit about the use of energy and the energy footprint in these vertical farms and what your take on that is.
I think when this all started, I mean, well, for me, when it all started, even back in 2014, indoor farming was probably, incredibly inefficient in many respects. A lot like a data center is at times. You're putting energy into the computing part and you're paying to cool it. It's a sort of lose-lose. And farming at that time was very similar. But the thing is that not so much maybe in Canada, but in a lot of other parts of the world where there are power issues and there are resource constraints more than we have here, there's been a tremendous amount of innovation that have brought down the energy footprint of an indoor farm. And on the other side of that, you have the renewables coming up in efficiency. So, we ourselves, started out the same way as everybody else. We were growing with metal halide or sodium lights, horribly inefficient, ton of IR, paying all through the nose for the HVAC to get rid of the heat. Today, we grow with a combination of LEDs and lasers. And with LEDs, we cut our energy footprint by probably around 50%, maybe even more. And with lasers, we may be able to get it down to maybe 35%. So, and I don't think we've even scratched the surface yet. I think we're realizing a lot about the plant. I think a lot of the time there was the assumption that you hit them hard and, hit them hard and hit them all day long. Well, there's not a lot of organic systems that do well under those situations. So we're seeing much more gradual uses of energy within the farm as well. So we're coming at this from so many different angles that I would say every month, there are new products that in some way impact the energy efficiency of an indoor farm. So much so that, we have this thing called a micro farm. It's about 20,000 plants. And, we were looking at the numbers and we want to partner up with a solar energy company. But I thoroughly believe with the energy increases from renewables, we're getting very close to the fact that with a high efficiency farm, you would actually be better off planting solar panels that could then power the farm and there would actually be surplus at certain times of the day,
Well,
which is pretty incredible. I don't think we're going to be growing corn indoors anytime soon, but if you look at this from filling gaps, high margin products, I think it's very much within reach of a profitable business. That's for sure.
that's really exciting, especially when, you see a lot of people complaining about their use of energy, and then the fact that companies are, greenwashing the benefits of vertical farming in terms of and how they mention it in their marketing. But it's interesting to see that the same perspective that you take on testing crops is also an approach you take when looking at different ways to manage and play with new energy options within your farm as well.
Yeah, I think I'm not a big fan of silver bullets. I think hybrid approaches, combinations are how we really make a dent in the energy footprint and the ecological footprint. It's really in the combination and our use of lots of different technologies, each of them shaving a little bit off that cost and making things more efficient. Where we know of a chiller that is out of Korea that, and I mean, there's other people that make them, they're absorption chillers. They turn waste heat into cooling. So you're not paying as much on the electricity side to do your HVAC. So there's all kinds of things going on all over the world that may or may not be suited for every area. But if you apply them in that area, well, then they can be huge wins. The other side of the coin, of course, is the single use products. We're out there talking about food security. One of the things that I'm always cognizant of and looking for solutions to is not solving one supply chain issue by building in another.
Yeah.
If we build in these multi-use products versus single-use products, well, then we're farming in the sense that a farm can run independently as much as possible for long periods of time versus relying on more supply chain downstream to keep it running.
Where are you seeing the most innovation or areas that have you excited, whether it's around the use of single use or multi use products or anything in the energy sphere?
Lighting is definitely a keystone component. For every watt you light with, you've got to deal with the heat.
Yeah.
So lighting is definitely somewhere that I think I see a tremendous amount of innovation, and it's one of the reasons why we're partnered with Radcorp, the company in South Africa, because they are spending a tremendous amount of time innovating regarding shifting light spectrums and doing a lot more to replicate what goes on in nature than just sort of lights on, lights off. So I think lighting is probably the area that is advancing a great deal and will affect everything else underneath it. Vertical farms in their many iterations, I think, is the real big game changer. We obviously know we have to increase our food output, which generally means food density. And in our vertical farming solution that we partnered up with partners to put together, so it's not ours, we're still a software company. We're very focused on the sort of 8 foot mark so that you're not on ladders and
Okay.
lifts. But I think that will be one of the next big innovations is how do we go up in a meaningful, efficient way?
Yeah, I have been seeing some of that innovation happening in the cannabis space. There's a company that I've had conversations with, and they're working on a podcast. That's how I'm familiar with what they're doing. It's called PIP, and they are having success with multi-tier installations, double tier, and I think there was even a triple tier installation. So obviously, experts in the racking space would probably be the first folks who'd be interested in maybe partnering or having conversations around what's the best use of making all these combinations work most efficiently.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, there's the two big train of thoughts, which is get the human to the plant or the plant to the human.
Yeah.
So many verticals are, sort of chair lifts or scissor lifts and so on and so forth. And then there's a lot of innovation going on in the whole idea of bringing the trays to the people.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of innovation in both areas. I think a lot of it's really, really cool.
You may have a different answer to this next question depending on the day that I ask you. But for now, as of today, what's the tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
I think growth, how do we finding good people is very difficult.
Yeah.
So, there's the growth of the business, but that has to be in balance with the growth of the people within the business and bringing people in. So growth is a big one. Finance is another massive one because taking the route that we've taken, which is revenue, is very tough.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher than maybe going out to VC. So am I making a mistake doing that? So those are the really big challenges for me. I think it's also probably because I am an infrastructure guy in the back end. So the technology problems don't phase me very much.
Yeah.
It's the business, but it's lonely. Um,
Yeah.
and you've got to be honest with yourself. So that's not easy either.
Yeah. As a fellow entrepreneur, I can definitely relate to the lonely aspect of the journey and having to figure it all yourself sometimes. And also helpful to have a peer, whatever you want to call it, your mastermind group, your peers
Yeah.
or folks you can, run ideas by. I think there's something to be said for having people whose opinions you trust is really important.
Oh, absolutely. And one of those, that I got to say is just absolutely invaluable for me. Just recently told me that, in his opinion, running a Fortune 500 was not as difficult as running a startup.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, some days it's a good thing my office doesn't have any windows in it. I'm on the ground floor as well, though, so that's
Yeah.
not really going to help.
So I think what I love about your approach and Kenobi's approach is the fact that you're always testing things out and you're using data to make really informed decisions. And I think that's probably one of the benefits of folks that work with you is you're always whether you're looking at crops, whether you're looking at, technology solutions or equipment configurations. And so when you think about who would be an ideal client or who would make sense to partner with Kenobi?
So the ideal client for us would be anybody that is either entering into this space, and we have some very, very small clients with the goal of growth. So I wouldn't say that a guy that wants to grow in his garage or in his shed in the back is probably a good fit for us, but somebody who's building a proof of concept to build out a farm, then that would be a very good customer for us. And that goes all the way up to probably farms in the sort of 250,000 square foot range. So really mid-sized small businesses. We talked a little bit about growth, and I approach clients in the same way as I approach our business. I really believe if you're getting into this space, and this may not apply to the really big guys, but that you should start small, focus on quality, get a fantastic quality going, find a place to sell it. You probably won't have a problem with that if you've got great quality. And all of the people that I've known that have followed that path are sold out for every crop they have. And I think that's every business, as you mentioned, that I've seen go straight to the $50 million facilities. It's a much tougher game. I mean, and then we do it all the time. We're always swapping out crops and technologies. And boy, we really run into the wall sometimes. And, doing that at 400, 1,000 plants, you can learn a lot from that. But doing that
Yeah.
at 1 million plants, I'm not sure that's more of a splat than it is an education.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that companies that are looking for growth and mid-sized companies are really where we're at. Distributed too. We're involved in a few social programs in Africa that I think is also a great opportunity for us. And then we do have a version of Canobi now for education for schools. So
I love the fact that you do that as well. Why do you think the social component is important for you as an organization to be involved in?
I think if you're going to contribute, there has to be value other than money.
Yeah.
And I want to contribute. I think, I mean, it maybe sounds a bit big-headed or arrogant, but I'd like to leave the world a little better than I found it. And it's funny in the data center world doing everything I did. I don't, I think I helped, but I don't know that I improved it. I think this is an area where I can. And I think when you like, we've had students come from agricultural families, and you ask them, do you want to be in agriculture? And they'll tell you, absolutely not, right? It's dirty. My, parents are exhausted, tired,
Yeah.
sick, tractors, no chance. But when they farm from their cell phone tablet for 2 months, it's a completely different thing. Pick a strawberry and actually eat it when it's ripe. It's a
Yeah.
whole different environment. And I guess I get a lot of value out of seeing that happen and knowing that if we're actually going to feed the planet and we do it through millions of small farms versus hundreds of thousands of big ones, I think that's going to hire a lot more people. It's going to drive a lot more innovation, build a lot of financial ecosystems around that. I just see this as a win, a massive win, and we all
That's
get to eat
really
good
great
food.
yeah, to boot as well. So as we get close to wrapping up, Robin, one of the things I've been doing is leaving some space at the end of these conversations for you as a platform. A lot of your colleagues, your fellow leaders in the vertical farming space have not only been on the show, but also listened to this show. So is there a message that you have for the vertical farming industry that is top of mind for you now?
No, well, I think we all need to really keep going with what we're
Yeah.
doing. I know that there's a lot of negative press at times about indoor farming and control environment farming. There's a lot of climatic pressure on greenhouses, and consolidation is always there to help. So I think that my message would be that rather than consolidation, with all of these technology advancements, not just in Canobi, it's getting a lot less expensive than they may think. They should look for alternatives because there are lots of alternatives out there that do the homework for sure, but it's not, there's the big guys that are out there. And, I've heard of a lot of clients that have gone there and believe they just can't afford to do this. And that's not the situation anymore. There are a lot of very innovative and very cost effective solutions, including Canobi.
Yeah. One thing that did catch my eye from the blog, and I probably would be remiss if I didn't mention it because AI is the hot topic now, but I did see that you have partnered with Harvest AI, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your initiative there as well.
Yeah, I met Harvest AI actually in Germany, and they're a fantastic group of guys and girls, and they are building an AI platform to look at yield. So
Okay,
they're essentially using different technologies to assess the yield of a plant.
that's exciting.
Yeah, Canobi itself does not have any core competencies yet in AI, and I believe in growing through partnerships and sort of a modularity. We got along really well, see a lot of things, I think, in the same way. So we sort of have a vector to help them commercialize. And I think what they're doing is absolutely fantastic. I think mid-sized farms are going to need more advanced technologies, maybe than even the bigger guys, because they're
Yeah,
going to be growing with more diversity. And a mid-sized farm can't necessarily hire a subject matter expert in every field. So they're going to rely on technology a lot more and more of a farm by wire model than maybe bigger guys who can.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm expecting to see a lot of movement in that space as well. So
Yeah,
it's
me
exciting.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, very.
Well, Robin, I want to thank you for spending some time with me and for your team for reaching out and making this happen with so many companies in the space. And I keep saying I thought I was going to be done after a couple of years, and there's just so much innovation happening. So
I
exciting
hope
to
not.
see with my interviews, as at least. But it's so exciting to see all the different facets and all the different ways you're supporting, especially mid-sized farms, and the approach that you've taken of all the work that you do being backed by data and a lot of testing. And I'm going to encourage listeners to check out your extensive blog posts. There's a ton of content there. The website is canobiagtech.com, but we'll be sure to include all the links in the show notes. And it's so exciting to see how your career trajectory has almost like prepared you for this moment in time to take advantage of this. And so I'm really excited for the future and can't wait to hear more and to hopefully get to meet in person at an upcoming conference.
Excellent. Yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Have a great day.